This is Death or Prison, brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. The men you are about to hear have spent more than 50 years in prison. We bring you stories of hope and encouragement.
Hello and welcome to the Death or Prison podcast brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. I am Johnny Branham, and to my right, Mr. Elmo Golden, and to my left, the Florida Assistant Secretary of Community Corrections, Mr. Joe Winkler. And we are continuing a conversation that we've been having over these past episodes as it pertains to community corrections, safety, different rules that are in place that helps people keep society safe and also transition themselves back into society successfully. We want to talk about non-compliance. I know that's a difficult time for the person who's under supervision and perhaps even for the supervisor who's doing the protocol for that. But walk us through that and how that looks.
Okay, very good. Now, I'll reflect back on time again and go back to the date of February 1st of 2004. And that day there was a young girl walking home to her residence, and she walked by a car wash. And as she walked by the car wash, she was abducted. And the video was caught on camera by the car wash video. A nationwide manhunt ensued, and eventually the person who abducted this young girl, Carly Bruschka, was located. And it was learned that he abducted her, raped her, and killed her. And that person was on felony supervision. He was an individual that was on probation. His name was Joseph Smith, and he recently died while he was an inmate at Union Correctional Institution. A couple months later, another event occurred over in the Deltona area near Daytona, where an individual on supervision along with 3 accomplices went into a residence. They went into the residence and they brutally killed 6 people along with a family dog. It was dubbed as Deltona's bloodiest massacre and often referred to as the Xbox murders. Once again, that individual that spearheaded that was on probation at the time too. What it did is from those events during the next legislative session, legislation was passed that required community corrections or probation officers to do certain things. And one thing is to identify individuals that meet the certain criteria. Violent felony offender of special concern. From that, those individuals that meet that criteria have to have a special hearing before they're released from jail. In these instances, it may have helped one of the crimes from not happening. We can't really go back in time, but it may have helped that. So legislation was passed. What it did internally at the Department of Corrections was we implemented something called zero tolerance. And the reason I say this is I talked to new recruits, and I talked to 2 new recruit classes last week. I brought up zero tolerance, and I asked them, what do you know about zero tolerance? And as I did that, a lot of them shook their head, and a lot of them acknowledged they knew what zero tolerance was about. But the reason I brought it up was because we've been at a zero tolerance since about 2008. These 2 events I talked about happened in 2004. The pendulum swung to zero tolerance, but since that time, the pendulum swung back the other direction, where we looked at reporting violations in a different manner. During the zero tolerance policy, we lost a lot of confidence. The courts lost a lot of confidence in community corrections. We reported the violations and we did a lot of warrantless arrests. We did warrantless arrests for people not paying supervision fees. That happened because some of the events that I talked about earlier. Since that time, what's changed during that time is we still report all willful noncompliance. But the way we do it now, we have different alternatives or different ways we can do that. One way we can do it is through a violation report, affidavit, and a warrant. We can do a violation report, affidavit, and a notice to appear to have that individual to appear in court at a certain time. We can use what we call is a technical violation notification letter, a 1-page letter that outlines noncompliance. Or we can use a program that we've implemented back in 2012 called the Alternative Sanctioning Program. And that program was modeled after a program called the Hawaii Hope Model. And what it looked at was the swiftness of looking at violations. You know, thinking about growing up and thinking about getting in trouble with our parents. If they reprimanded us a month after we did something, it was counterproductive. It really wasn't productive when it came to that discipline. And through the Alternative Sanction Program, we have the same philosophy. We feel like the swiftness of the non-compliance being addressed will actually help that individual out. So we have different ways we report technical non-compliance through the ways I mentioned. But I really want to say that the alternative sanction program has been a really good program. We started it in 2012 down South Florida, worked its way up. And through the years, we've implemented it in every judicial circuit. And in 2019, legislation was passed through House Bill 7125 that codified that program into Florida statute. And since the onset of the program, as it's evolved over the last 3 years, we've reduced the number of technical violations going to prison by over 2,000 individuals a year. So our days of zero tolerance are long gone. Unfortunately, when we bring up zero tolerance or talk about reporting noncompliance, a lot of the individuals on supervision still remember it, still reflect back on it, and we have probation officers, as I mentioned earlier, new recruits that still reflect back to the zero tolerance days, and a lot of them weren't even around in the department at that time.
Yeah, I remember the no tolerance, and I want to tell you, I was already incarcerated, and I used to watch the guys come in. And I was like, "Wow, man, it's really harsh. That's really harsh. The no tolerance." And let me tell you, from an offender's point of view, that's what really drew a wedge between us, between the probation officer and the guy that committed the crime, because now we automatically again believe that I can't make it. I'm not going to get the support I need. Nobody's going to give me the resources. It's easier for the probation officer to lock me up and not do as much paperwork. We developed this culture of thinking that you guys, the probation officer, were the enemy, and that was I guess one of the blunders or failure in the probation system. I'm glad that this information is getting out, because I actually got out of prison 2 years ago thinking that I was still up under the no tolerance law. I got out thinking that. So for me, my experience, my probation officer was totally different. It's not unique. I noticed that when I go to the office. But to have you sit here and tell us that doesn't even exist anymore, I haven't experienced that from my probation officer at all, and which I'll talk about that later on. But I'm so glad that, because you'll be surprised how many men and women, just like those new recruits, still believe that is in existence.
13 years we've been out of zero tolerance, and your comments, Elmo, speak volumes.
It speaks volumes, and it also alleviates a lot of stress, I would say, a lot of anxiety, and there's a lot of misinformation. So again, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being here, shedding light on a lot of misinformation, giving the true facts and the state of the community corrections as it stands today. You mentioned alternatives. What are some of those alternatives? What does that look like for someone who would fall into that bracket?
Okay, yeah. Going back to when we first started talking, we talked about different ways that we protect the public, and I talked about that pendulum where we protect the public by monitoring the conditions, and we went all the way to the other extreme. And one way we do that is by providing positive reinforcement programs to our individuals under supervision. And I'll talk about 3 of them, and one of them you're close to with the early terms. But the first one is a program that we've got that we call the Interactive Offender Tracking System. It's a spinoff from a program that we had years ago that was called the Independent Reporting Status. And the premise behind it is that we've got a lot of individuals that are on supervision for a first offense that's chances of recidivating are probably not that high. We call them low-risk offenders. And it's evidence-based research says that over-supervising these offenders, these individuals, is counterproductive. So we've implemented this telephone reporting system through the use of voice biometrics, where we allow certain individuals to report through the telephone. Once again, it's not our high-risk individuals. It's not individuals that have been on probation many times. It's generally one of our first-time people that have been on supervision for lower-grade offenses. We started the program back in June of 2019, and we slowly climbed to about 6,000 individuals participating in the program, essentially a reward for good behavior for complying with the terms of supervision. And then back last year, September of 2020, we looked at the program and said, you know what, it's a good incentive program, but it might be a way that as a supervision strategy where we look at it a little bit different. Instead of having it as a reward for those individuals on supervision, we look at those individuals at the onset of supervision. And as they're placed on supervision during the intake portion, during the first 60 days, if we feel like they're low-risk individuals, ones that are not susceptible to committing more crimes and are in compliance with their case, then at that point, we looked at putting those individuals through the program. We started a pilot in the Bartow area, Polk County area. The pilot went very good, so we extended the pilot throughout the state, one judicial circuit in each of the regions throughout the state, and it worked out good. And now we've done implementation statewide, and we've got close to 11,000 individuals that are participating in this program that's called an Interactive Offender Tracking System. Once again, for our low-risk offenders, and it's proven to be a very good option for us. And we talk about overcrowding in the probation offices, and we talked about that earlier, that it really eliminates that too. You think about the number of individuals that report to probation, we're reducing that footprint by over 11,000 a month. Now, the other side to it is if we have a mission critical activity, something that we need to do within the probation office, we have the luxury of calling that individual into the probation office, having them report if we need to do a drug test, if we need to do something with them that may be done more suited in the probation office. We still have the luxury to do that. Also, through the telephone reporting and through the voice biometrics, we can have preset messages for them. When they call in to report to probation and we ask a series of questions, we have the ability to communicate with them as well. So it's proven to be a very good program. Another program that we've got is a program that we call merit-based activity. And those of you all that know supervision and have been on supervision before, you've probably heard about an intensive program called community control, or maybe even referred to as house arrest. It's a very intensive form of supervision. We require individuals that participate in this program to report to the probation office once a week instead of once a month. And for individuals that participate in the community control program or sentenced to community control, they're required to fill out a schedule each week they report to the probation office. And on that schedule, it has an hourly accounting of their activities for that week. As they report back the following week, they fill out a new schedule. Program's very intensive. Generally, it's a 2-year program, the most intensive form of supervision we have in community corrections. Our success rate for individuals that participate in this program is right about 28%, which is very low. But we had an officer in our Mariana probation office several years ago named Daryl Williams that made a suggestion or recommendation through his chain of command. And he said, you know, through this program, it's pretty intense. We have a lot of individuals that are not successful in the program because of the intensity. And he reflected back on family support. And he said, you know what? Family support is a good indicator for success. And through this program, if we've got individuals that are in compliance with community control, we need to look at the program and allow those individuals that meet the criteria to have time with their family through the course of the week. Because the program is very intensive, we have departmental procedure that outlines when they can leave their residence. And through our departmental procedure, we don't allow them to have family time. But Mr. Daryl Williams made this suggestion, and he said that he had reported a lot of non-compliance back for being out of place. And when he further investigated it, he realized that a lot of times they were out of place, the individuals were out of place, they were spending time with their family. It wasn't that they were up to something wrong, doing something wrong. They were spending quality time with their family. It just wasn't allowed per our departmental procedure. So he made this suggestion to implement this merit-based activity program. And once again, we ran a pilot on it. The pilot worked really good. We implemented it statewide, and it was also codified in statute through Florida legislation. And the program's so good, I mentioned that our success rate for our community control offenders is right at 28%. Our community control offenders that participate in this program, merit-based activity, have a success rate of over 72%. So when we look at rewarding our offender population or the individuals on supervision, we've got 2 really good programs, one for our lowest risk offenders and one for our highest risk offenders or strictest supervision. And we have 2 programs that have proven to be excellent programs by the success rates that we've had from these programs. And the last one I'll talk about, and I'll turn it over to Johnny on this because he knows a lot more about it than me, is our early term process, early terminations. We have a lot of individuals that come in on supervision that are there to right a wrong. They made a mistake. They want to get off supervision. They want to comply with any instructions that were provided by the court. They want to comply with any instructions that are provided by the probation officer. Once they satisfy those conditions, they want to get off supervision. They don't want to be held down by this weight called probation. So they want to seek early termination. Florida statute and our departmental procedure outlines some ways that we can do early terminations. We do have some strict criteria on it. They have to complete at least half their term, the individuals on supervision. And we cannot make recommendations for individuals that have committed violent offenses. However, an individual on supervision has the luxury of working through a pro se motion or working through the courts or working through an attorney to try to seek the early term route. And I would highly recommend if somebody's on supervision and they're in substantial compliance with their case, they've satisfied the special conditions of supervision, they're in compliance with all the standard conditions of supervision, to seek clarification, seek guidance from the probation officer, and see what they can do about being early term from supervision. That's a good reward, a good incentive to do things and do things the right way. And Johnny, I know you've got a lot better story than me.
Yes. I remember sitting in a chapel while I was incarcerated many years ago, and it was a gentleman who came in. He was on probation, and he said, I had my probation early terminated. And he said he did this in front of a group of men and women who were sitting in the probation office, and it got quiet. He said, and there's a secret. He said, I just followed the rules. And everybody's like, oh. And he's like, no, I sincerely set out to complete this and get it early terminated. So in my case, one of the things that I did was I wanted to be on the same page with who was supervising me. What is it going to take for me to be successful? At the top of that list was the court costs, any type of restitution and things of that nature. Make sure you get that taken care of. And it's a discipline. What I mean by that is when you're earning money, and it might not be that much, depending upon where you're working, you have to say, I want to set aside money each month to allocate towards taking care of my costs, taking care of my fines. The next thing I did was I didn't really focus on getting it terminated early. I just did what was in my heart to do. I point to my faith. You can't get around it for me. It was God is first, and I wanted to honor God. And so in honoring God, I wanted to do the right thing. And as a consequence of honoring God and doing the right thing, things just kind of happen. There are some things that are outside of the norm for a person that's looking to get their probation terminated. Number one, there was an attorney, and I think I shared this in another segment, but there was an attorney who offered to take on my case pro bono. Then there was a probation officer who says, listen, you've been doing the right thing. You're in school, you're working, all of your fines are paid off. I don't have any objection for signing off on saying that you're an individual that needs to be off of probation. Then the final shoe dropped when the judge says, well, he submitted all of this stuff. I submitted so much stuff, and this is funny. This is a funny story. I submitted so much stuff to the attorney kind of let me in on. The judge doesn't think there's no way this guy did all this stuff. I want to investigate this. You mean to tell me he's got he's got a ministry, he's a pastor, he's got a business that helps returning citizens, a staffing agency. You mean to tell me he's going in and he's teaching life skills as a partnership with another ministry? You mean to tell me that the sheriff's office of Hillsborough County gave him an award for perseverance? You mean to tell me that he's on a podcast that's being put into the prisons all over the United States? I mentioned that. And when she did all of the investigating, it was terminated before I even knew it. The attorney gives me a call and says, Johnny, did you see the order? I said, no, I was working today. What it was? He says, your probation was terminated. Never stepped foot in court, never spoke to a judge, never did anything. An order came through the mail. I will say this. I said all of those things, and I'm speaking directly to the men and the women in there. God will open doors that no man can shut. That's a scripture in Revelations. He opens doors when he sees your faithfulness, the why you're doing it. And the why I was doing it is because, as I said in the last segment, I had already turned the page. I was just trying to catch everybody up to my transformation. I'm grateful for the entire process. And what I mean by that is I'm even grateful that I had to go through what I had to go through in order to get to that result, because I get it to glorify God. I get to say to the men in there and to the women in there who've heard the stories, oh, they're out to get you. Oh, they'll violate you. Oh, they'll throw the book at you. They're not there to help you. There's no way you get early terminated. Oh, man, you got violent charges. Oh, man, there's no way. I'm here to say, but God. All of those things happen, but God. And what I mean, the but God is, yes, all of those things, some of those things may be, true in some people's lives. And some of those are just hypotheticals, but God is the final say. What was your experience like, Elmo?
Oh, I'm still going through the process. I respect the process. And I know that every door, like you said, that's being opened is only God. For me, it's to really send a message to the guys, that the men and women that especially the guys that I left behind that said this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and this and that. I mean, I didn't receive anything negative from those guys, but I want to tell them that you have a witness here now, and I'll speak on behalf of the probation officer that I have, Ms. Milton, totally supportive in everything that I've been doing. You have to understand something. You have this paper in front of you, but you also have to prove to everybody else that, hey, I am transformed. I am the new guy. I am a person that wants to be productive in society. You have to come out of there with that mindset. It's always going to be challenging for you, whether you're on probation or not. But when you go into a system and your mind is not closed and you have an opportunity to work with people that have your best interests at hand, that want to see you do well, it makes the process even that much more easier.
And when I came here today, I wanted to impact people. I really wanted to relay the message about probation, because there is a misconception. There is some communication gaps between individuals that are incarcerated and the individuals that are on supervision. And I told myself, if I can impact one person's life, I've done my job. What I would like to do, Elmo, is partner with you and see if we can look at getting you off supervision. And if we can do that, my goal has been completed. So why don't we partner together and see what we can come up with?
Amen. I feel like praying. I feel like praying. I thank God right now for everything that He's doing in my life. I really just appreciate what this partnership, not just between you and I, but between us and God, because this is only something that God moving, and you get the opportunity to see this live on the podcast. If you can get out of prison and you do what's right, everything else will fall into place. Thank you, man. I really appreciate that. And my restitution is paid. And my court costs are paid.
Just for the record.
Just for the record. Yes. I didn't buy any new shoes.
I want to tap into just a little bit about the resources that are available. And then we'll be having this conversation even in the next episode, but I want to at least start that conversation now as to some of the resources that are available statewide for individuals that are looking to better themselves.
Okay, yeah, very good. And that's probably the most important aspect of supervision. When people think of probation officers, they don't really think about the tools and resources we can provide. But our role is to provide tools and resources, not just to help an individual to successfully complete supervision, but to be better people when they're off supervision. And one of the best tools that we have in the Department of Corrections, and we briefly talked about it earlier, is the role of the employment specialist. And I'm going to go back to that and say that an individual on supervision, we want them gainfully employed. We want them being productive members of society. And we've got our employment specialists in each of our areas that will help somebody find jobs and really get employability skills. So one of our best tools and resources is employment. And as we talk further, I'll give you some numbers of how I know employability really impacts somebody's success. Also, when it comes to substance use treatment, approximately 60% of the individuals that are incarcerated and 60% of the individuals that are placed on probation have some kind of substance use treatment need. And that speaks volumes. That's what we know about based on their prior offenses, their current offenses, and their drug history. That's not anything that's self-reported. I would assume that the number is probably even higher than the almost 60%. What we do in the Department of Corrections is we have funding that's allocated for individuals that are sentenced to substance abuse treatment, whether it's residential. We have residential beds throughout the state where if somebody's sentenced to residential treatment, which is a long-term intensive inpatient treatment, we have funding for those individuals. Or if they're like a lot of other individuals that are placed on supervision that have a substance abuse or substance use issue and they're ordered to some kind of outpatient treatment, we have funding that's available for those individuals. Our funding that we have available could be a total DC funding where we pay for everything. It could be what we call copay, where we pay half of it, or the individual can pay for it themselves. So it really depends on their financial needs. And we haven't talked a lot about financials, but we don't want somebody not complying with supervision because they don't have the means to pay for something. And one of the ways or one of the resources we have is by providing the funding through the treatment, whether it's residential treatment or whether it's through some kind of outpatient treatment that they live in the community and do this treatment in the community. We also have a program in 10 of our judicial circuits that we call the First Step program. It's an excellent program. Individuals that live in counties that there's judicial orders or admin orders out there that require them to pay $1 a month towards this program is beneficial. They pay $1 a month and that money goes into a pool of money, and that money can be used by individuals that are on supervision. If you have an individual being released from prison and they don't have a good residence to go to or viable residence, we want to make sure they're stable. And if we've got this First Step program, which we do in 10 of our judicial circuits, we're allowed to pay for some housing for that individual. Do we expect repayment? We'll give them repayment paperwork, but we're not going to refer that case back to court if they don't pay. We want these people to be financially stable and be able to survive in the communities, once again, the communities that each of us live in. And the last thing I'll talk about is our Thinking for a Change program, an excellent program. Inmates that are incarcerated in the institutions throughout the state have the luxury of taking the Thinking for a Change or T4C program. And we have the T4C program throughout the state in our probation offices. It's a very intensive course. It's a 25-session course, 2 hours each session. Outside on the streets, we have our community corrections professionals, our probation officers that are teaching this course. And inside the fences, we have institutional staff that are teaching these courses. It's a really good course because it restructures and helps that individual rethink or restructure the way they think. It's an excellent program. It's endorsed by the National Institute of Corrections, and it's proven to be a really good option for individuals that are incarcerated, being reintegrated back to the society, or individuals that are placed on supervision. We also, there's sometimes the courts may order it as a condition of supervision, or it may be a sanction that we have through our alternative sanctioning program. But once again, the individuals that participate do reap some rewards of a really good program we have within the Department of Corrections.
I actually took that program, that T4C, Thinking for a Change. It was taught by Donnie Sheffield on the inside. My probation officer, when I lived in Tampa, Miss Benitez, she was teaching all kinds of life skills. I didn't even know that the probation officer would actually do life skill programs with you, teach you, have a time set aside where they would actually teach the class. I didn't know that. I thought it was always sourced out.
It's an excellent program, and I'm glad you're a good endorser of it because it really, really does help, really works.
How would an individual get the ball rolling if they're transitioning? They know that they got a few months to maybe a year and they're wanting to transition out to one of those programs? How would they get the ball rolling?
What they would do, they have a classification officer inside the fences that they can talk to. Those classification officers have contact with our probation staff. And we've talked about communication, how important that communication is between the individual on supervision and the probation officer. What we haven't talked about is how important that communication is for the incarcerated inmate with the classification officer, and in turn, that classification officer, how important that communication is with the probation officer that's going to be supervising the individual on the street. I would say, to answer your question in a quick answer, if there's an inmate that wants to get the ball rolling, to communicate that with classification and ask them to communicate that with the probation officer in the area that they're going to be released to or live in upon their release.
How much contact does the probation officer and the classification officer have? How much contact do they have? The classification officer that's inside the prison and the probation officer?
Not enough. And that's a really good question. Elaborate on what both of you ask. We wish that communication would be more. There is communication there, but it's surely not enough. The best way to improve that communication is by having that inmate speak with the classification officer and having them relay messages to that probation staff on the street. And maybe from this podcast, maybe we look at improving that communication, because it is there, but it can always even be enhanced.
And the reason I ask that, because I know that with the resources, when we talk about the resources that when a guy can expect when they get out, they can translate that information to the classification officer, and it'll be an additional resource, additional information to give that person a better chance.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yep. The more tools and resources that are provided, the better chance an individual has of succeeding on probation and in the real world.
Something that I do is a partnership, even with Alpha, Lean On Me, and being a mentor, is I send in an assessment. We all know about the short-term, long-term sentence programs where they're peer-to-peer mentors throughout the state of Florida. One of the things that I came up with was a brief assessment just to send in to the people that are coming back to my area, the returning citizens, so that I know their needs. And if there are needs that I can help them with, I go ahead and assist them with. If there's something that I need to partner with someone else on, I'll have that information in front of me. Communication is very, very important in that regard. You have been listening to the Death or Prison podcast, brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. I am Johnny Branham. To my right, Mr. Elmo Golden. To my left, the Assistant Secretary of Community Corrections, Mr. Joe Winkler. Now, this is the Death or Prison podcast, but we say choose life.
I can change the world. Feed one, teach one. One boy